as we hear this story of the prophet Elisha, who goes to Shunem and meets this man and woman who then provide for him and provide housing for him so that whenever he's in the area, he has a place to stay. I think of that story and actually many other things that happened. When I think of that, it reminds me of something in my own life, a little story that's kind of funny. But think about Elisha for a moment. And if you have a moment this week, take time to look at the continuation of that story and all the miracles that the prophet Elisha works, because he's a foreshadowing of Christ. You see him doing many things, healing of people, raising from the dead, and multiplication of loaves. You see him doing all those things, and he's a foreshadowing, of course, of Christ. But they provided housing for him. It reminded me of a kind of a humorous thing that happened that's also charming. When I was a younger priest, I was assigned to St. Mary's Parish in Corvallis, and there was a family there I was very close to. Got to know a lot of great families there. It was a wonderful assignment. But they had this little girl in their family named Sarah. She was 7, I think, at the time. And one day it dawned on her that Father John doesn't have any children. And he's never going to have any children. And she asked her mom, well, what's going to happen to him when he's old? Who's going to take care of him? So sweet. She was thinking about that. Maybe she heard her parents talking about caring for their parents, her grandparents, caring for her grandparents. Regardless, she was very concerned, and her mom said, I don't know. They probably have maybe some retirement housing for the priests. She didn't really know. And so Sarah said, well, when I get married and have a house, I'll always have a room over the garage for Father John. Isn't that sweet? Well, I reminded her of that throughout her life. And, joking, of course, and, I'm known for drilling a joke right into the ground. But I'd remind her of that from time to time. And then when she finally did get engaged, and we went out for breakfast so I could meet her fiance, just the three of us, it was lovely, Joey. I said to Joey, did Sarah tell you about the room over the garage? And Joey said, yeah, she said you would probably bring that up. I said, okay, here's my whole portfolio. I've got my retirement figured out, and it's based on this room. So I let him know I was joking, don't worry. But it was just such a considerate thought on her part of caring for the priest in her church. But that's what churches do. Every church provides housing for the priest. I live in the rectory right across the street from the church, and all our parishes do that, and all our parishes provide retirement plans, just like every organization. It's good business, but it's good practice. But it gives me occasion to say, as the prophet Elisha was grateful for this couple in Shunem who provided for him, I want you to know I never take those things for granted. I never take for granted that the call to priesthood and the opportunity to serve the Lord in the mission of the church, which I am committed to and I love being a priest, but I never take it for granted that that's possible because of the generosity of parishioners who say, we want to have a church. We want to have a priest. We want to have the sacraments. And we want to provide for that. And it's also your generosity that makes it possible to have the parish and school staff. Why? Because you're committed to making sure our children are educated in the faith, making sure we have the sacraments provided and educational opportunities and the resources that we need, the infrastructure to be able to do the mission of the gospel. That is a sign of your commitment to that. And I want you to know I never take that for granted, that it's on your generosity, but your commitment to Christ. That's what we're called to do. Our mission as a parish is to do just that, right? We say that in our mission statement, but it could be most any parish's mission statement, to love God, to love others, and to make disciples of Jesus Christ. But also to provide what's necessary in order to do that. That's gospel, or the gospel today is working our way through the Gospel of Matthew. The reading from 2 Kings about the prophet Elisha and this couple providing for him is in keeping with what Jesus says at the second half of the Gospel account today. He's speaking to his apostles and saying, whoever receives you receives me, because the apostles are going to act in the name of Christ in the ministry that they pass down through apostolic succession to our own day. And so the ministry of the church, exercised by bishops and priests and deacons, but also lay ministers and teachers, all of that is the work of Christ in the gospel, right? And so he's telling them, whoever receives you, he tells the apostles, receives me. Whoever receives a prophet, because he's a prophet, receives a prophet's reward. He's just saying that these are people will provide for you, will support you. And he wants them to know that that's part of the mission, and we're all in this mission together because it's our church's total commitment. But what is it about then with that mission to love God, love others, and make disciples of Jesus Christ? It's so that we can live the gospel rightfully, supported by the sacraments, supported by the teaching of the church, and people who are committed to that ministry. I'm so grateful for the teachers and pastoral ministers and staff in this parish for their commitment. They're here working at this parish because of a sense of mission. You know, you can get a better job as far as paying goes, but I think there's no better job than serving the Lord in the church. Everybody who's on the staff are there for that reason. And it's a working relationship that we all do together. And then you all get involved in so many different ways. That's really the church alive, the body of Christ doing its good work. But what is that called to discipleship? What is that called to discipleship? Jesus tells the apostles that it has to do with putting Christ first. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. These are strong sayings. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Just stop right there. Now, there is an actual logic to this where it makes perfect sense when you think of it this way. Because sometimes we think of that, and on a very practical level, well, my gosh, I love my spouse, I love my children, and I love God too, but, they're right here, and sometimes in that personal relationship, of course, we experience that more. And I know sometimes people have tension with that. Do I love God more than my family? How do you think that through? Well, here's a simple way. Who gave you your spouse? Who gave you your very life? Who gave you your children? Everything is a gift from God. And when we realize that God is the source of everything that exists, all the people that I love, and my own life, well, then it's clear. Of course I'm grateful to God more than anything. And gratitude is a sign of that love. And it helps us to understand the priority. Furthermore, if we do love God first and make Christ our priority, then he'll teach us how to love our spouse, our children, our family, our friends, all the people who are dear to us. When we are clear about the priority of God first, Christ first, then he teaches us how to put everything in their proper balance. That's the logic behind the gospel. But this last statement is actually even stronger. Whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Now, when we think about the cross, taking up our cross, in our own times, the most common way we think of that is the difficulties and hardships that we face, different illnesses or struggles, or the cross of getting the right kind of employment or being employed if we're unemployed, the cross of burden of difficult relationships or whatever we're suffering. This coronavirus, the difficulties we're facing in our country, in our world. Those are the crosses that we bear, and we're called to bear them knowing that Christ is there with us, carrying them with us. So that's one way to understand it, and it is a very appropriate way to understand carrying our cross. But it's not the original way it was understood. It's not what the apostles were thinking of when Jesus says, unless you're willing to pick up your cross and follow me. Because this account is being told after they actually saw him crucified and saw what the cross meant and what the cost of discipleship means. And all the apostles, that's to whom he's addressing these words, all the apostles except for John, we're not so sure about John, but all of them suffered martyrdom. Peter himself was crucified. Andrew was crucified. They experienced the cross in very real ways. And Jesus is telling them, you need to be all in completely and even be willing to put your lives on the line for me. And then you'll know the fullness of life. See, if they would have cut and run, they wouldn't have understood what discipleship meant. And so we have to remember, in the early church, it was really a huge sacrifice to claim Christ and to put Christ first. But they did that. They actually left their livelihood and followed Christ. And we are eternally grateful for that commitment, because that's the foundation of the church. On Jesus, his passion, death, and resurrection, and then the rock of Peter, and the church continuing throughout the ages. So we're grateful for that. And it's a reminder to us to put Christ first. Well, fortunately, we don't have to worry about suffering in those ways, but there are subtle ways. As our world gets more and more secular, it perhaps will be, and frankly already is in many circumstances, for people, it's more awkward to profess your faith or to talk about your faith, because there are more people in this world who have no faith or could care less about faith or think it's archaic, or you still believe that stuff? Or you still go to church? And we have to say, well, yes, I do. And here's why. And then talk about the hope and the joy that we gain in our true faith in Christ, because it is the truth of who we are, the way, the truth, and the life. So we need to be prepared for that and have that same kind of boldness. That's what we're called to as disciples, to hold firm to that faith, to be witnesses of that faith, to be grateful for that faith, and to put Christ first. Because when we do so, that's how we glorify God. So I think it's just a worthwhile exercise for us, especially in this time of coronavirus, when it's not as easy to get to church. It's not as easy to practice the faith in the ways we normally had been doing it before. But we're going to be at this for a long while. So are we prepared? Are we applying ourselves to put Christ first in our lives, to make sure that every day we make time for Christ in prayer? Every week we make time for Christ in worship, as best we can on live stream in the different ways, but also at our homes, have a shrine or some way to practice the faith. Yeah, the call to discipleship is a big call, of course. It's putting Christ first. But in this, we're going to discover the fullness of life. This last line that he has here, he says, whoever finds his life will lose it. What he means there is finds his life. We find our life because we're looking for it. We're looking for it. And sometimes we're looking in the wrong places. And so we find what we think is life, and it's usually the things in this world. A lot of times people, it's pursuit of money, or pursuit of fame, or pursuit of control in my life, or pursuit of power, or different kinds of things that we pursue. That's what we're going to lose, because it's not really life. It's not really the fullness of life. But whoever loses his life for my sake, puts me first, is willing to embrace the cross, they will find it. They'll find the fullness of life by which we glorify